The day Prince Rhaegar Targaryen fell upon the trident, the fate of Elia Martell and her children weighed like a leaden pall over all of Dorne. Word drifted south, carried upon the wings of ravens and the fearful whispers of travelers, telling of how King Aerys had grown madder still with each passing hour, of how the Lannisters lingered at the fringes, waiting for their moment to claim the capital, of how Elia and her children were left vulnerable in King's Landing, surrounded by uncertain loyalties as the final push of Robert Baratheon's rebellion came crashing toward the heart of the Seven Kingdoms. In Sunspear, Doran Martell quietly raged. Oberyn seethed. 1,000 prickly rumors circled the sandy courtyards and palm-shaded balconies, and each rumor came laced with dread. Elia would be given as a hostage to Baratheon. Elia would be cast aside by the crown. Elia would be protected so long as Rhaegar's claims still held. None of these half-truths or illusions satisfied the thirst for genuine knowledge in the princes of Dorne. One thing was certain. Prince Rhaegar was gone, and so too was the bright promise of the Targaryen future that had once seemed so alluring. Doran Martell had to decide swiftly, for though he was a careful man by nature, events were conspiring against him more rapidly than any moment in his political life. The war had turned. Word reached Sunspear that King Aerys was barricaded within the Red Keep, suspicious of everyone, even the loyal pyromancers he had once courted to forge wildfire beneath the city's bowels. The Lannisters, silent throughout the rebellion, waited on the outskirts, claiming neutrality until the last possible second so they might swoop in and reap the greatest spoils. Men of Dorne, hot-blooded, quick to anger, clamored for vengeance. Elia was their princess. She had been entrusted to House Targaryen and had borne the crown prince's children. To think she might now be left unguarded among schemers and cutthroats in King's Landing was intolerable. Each step across the polished tiles of the water gardens weighed heavily on Doran as he paced, pondering if there might still be a diplomatic solution. Yet the swirl of events suggested that King's Landing was about to become a butcher's yard, a stage for the final confrontation that would settle the rebellion, one way or another. The Targaryens had lost their champion on the battlefield. Robert Baratheon, unstoppable in his anger and might, was rumored to be taking the city by storm. And then there was Tywin Lannister, who had marched with a fresh force, cunningly timed to arrive after others had spent their strength. The Martells had only a small window to act. Oberyn Martell, the Red Viper, pressed for immediate action. His passion was a flame that lit the halls of Sunspear, and he would not be denied. He had little time for the careful weighing of possibilities that consumed his elder brother. He wanted blood for blood. The songs of knights and claims to loyalty meant little to Oberyn if they failed to protect Elia and her children in the hour of greatest danger. A new rumor stirred. Tywin Lannister's approach toward King's Landing was not to succor the Targaryens, but to betray them. If that was the case, then Elia and Rhaenys and Aegon stood in mortal peril. Aerys would not stop them from harm. He was too concerned with his own personal demons to shield any from Tywin's greed. The city's defenders had mostly turned their minds to survival rather than loyalty. If the Lannisters forced the city gates, it could be too late to save Elia from whatever vengeance, cruelty, or so-called mercy Tywin might dole out. The Martell banners soon flew in the scorching desert sun. On Doran's command, couched in carefully reasoned words, but delivered with uncharacteristic urgency, Sunspear's assembled knights, spearmen, and mounted archers prepared to march. Their aim: rescue their princess and avenge any insult done to the honor of House Martell. Most were only too eager to do so. They tightened saddle straps, sharpened blades, and drank of the water garden's cool fountains in a final indulgence before heading out under the blazing Dornish sky. And with them rode Oberyn Martell, who insisted upon taking the vanguard. He would bring Elia home, or else he would die beneath the Red Keep's walls. Doran watched them depart from a high balcony. His face did not betray the trembling anxiety that came from defying all the old lessons of caution he had learned over decades. It was not purely revenge or love that spurred him to this. It was survival. The realm might collapse, and the newly victorious rebels would demand concessions from any who had supported the dragon. House Martell could ill afford to be found cowering in the south. If Elia was lost, If her children perished, the stain would never wash away. They had pinned their fortunes on this marriage, on forging ties that would elevate Dorne in the eyes of the Iron Throne. Now they had no choice but to act swiftly to protect their own. The march north took time, too much time for Oberyn's liking. They had to cross the Prince's Pass or the Boneway, both treacherous routes. Doran had chosen to lead the majority of the host via the Prince's Pass, figuring that the Tyrell forces in the Reach might still block the roads if the Dornish took the more southern route. Scouts and outriders reported that Tywin Lannister's host traveled near, but not too close to, King's Landing, awaiting the final moments of the war like a wolf lurking in the darkness. The gold and crimson banners had not yet been unfurled on the city's walls. It meant the window was open, but for how long? Oberyn chafed under any delay. He demanded they push ahead, that he should ride forth with a smaller contingent of spears and the fastest horses to reach King's Landing in days rather than the week or more Doran proposed. Doran, mindful of the difference between a cavalry raid and a feasible strike to rescue Elia, balanced that risk. In the end, it was decided that Oberyn would lead a forward force of 3,000, mainly light cavalry, some mounted spearmen, and a few hundred archers on swift horses. Doran followed with the heavier infantry and supply wagons. This arrangement satisfied no one fully, but Oberyn set out with all possible speed, determined to get to the city before Tywin's horde. The journey was fraught with tension. Along the dusty roads, Oberyn found peasants fleeing the ravages of the war, half-starved, some seeking refuge behind the city walls. "Where do you go?" Oberyn would ask them. "King's Landing," they would reply, "or anywhere but here." None were certain what future awaited them at the capital, but the capital was rumored to be the last holdout of any stable authority. Whether by Targaryen or by the rebel cause, they hardly cared. Sometimes Oberyn offered bread or water to the neediest among them. Sometimes he pressed for information. Had they seen the Lannisters, the Tyrells, Baratheon men, or Stormlanders? A few said they had seen the lion banners, glimpsed far on the horizon. Others insisted the Golden Lions were only a rumor. Some said Robert Baratheon himself was traveling to King's Landing to demand Aerys' surrender. The swirl of rumor was dizzying, and only one thing was certain. The city would soon be a crucible where all these armies collided. At last, the spires of King's Landing rose like jagged teeth against a hazy sky. The city's walls were manned by Targaryen loyalists, but those loyalists were beleaguered, tired, uncertain. The Gold Cloaks had largely thrown their lot in with whomever promised them gold and survival. Within the Red Keep, King Aerys brooded in madness. Only a shadow of the true shape of the city's chaos greeted Oberyn's vanguard when they found themselves on a hill south and east of the city, scanning the horizon for Lannister or Baratheon banners. No sign of Tywin yet, no sign of the rebel host. But the question remained, would the King's Landing gates even open to Dornishmen? And if they did open, who was to say that it wasn't all a trap, orchestrated by the king's paranoia? Oberyn's first instinct was to storm the gates immediately, but cooler heads among his captains urged him to signal the city garrison, to request entry in the name of Prince Doran Martell, brother to Princess Elia. Let them see the Martell banners. Let them see that no deception was intended, only a sworn oath to protect the princess and the royal heirs. While Oberyn seethed at the delays, he understood that a fruitless assault on the walls would doom Elia if King Aerys decided to blame her or suspect her of conspiring with the Dornish. So messengers were sent, banners raised, trumpets sounded, the walls filled with the curious shapes of men in Targaryen livery. A long hour passed before the city's portcullis in the Gate of the Gods groaned upward, and a small group of Targaryen knights, flanked by gold cloaks, rode out to parley. They were cautious, these knights. Their leader was Ser Gon Mutun, bearing the red salmon of his house on his surcoat. He was polite enough to Oberyn, though suspicious. He did not hide his confusion at the Dornish arrival. "I come by the order of King Aerys, who demands to know your purpose," Ser Gon said. He was not informed of any movement of Dornish troops to our aid. Oberyn had to hide his exasperation. Of course they had not been informed. There had been no time for such courtesies. "We have come to secure the person of Princess Elia Martell, mother to the king's grandchildren, and ensure her safety," he said. His voice was dangerously smooth. "We come as loyal subjects of the crown, but also as her family. We will not stand idle while the Lannisters or the rebels threaten her." When pressed on whether they still supported the Targaryen cause, Oberyn chose his words carefully. "If the king remains true to the marriage alliance with our house, we shall be his sword and shield," he stated, though it was an uneasy promise. The war's tide was turning so swiftly it was folly to speak of unwavering loyalty. Still, the main impetus was the safety of Elia and her children. That, at least, Oberyn could vow wholeheartedly. Ser Gon relayed that King Aerys was wary of any large armed host in the city. "You will be permitted entry with, say, 500 men," Ser Gon announced after conferring with the Gold Cloak's commander. "The rest must remain outside the walls." King's orders. The Red Viper's black eyes flashed dangerously at the idea of being separated from his advantage of numbers. But with the main Martell infantry still a day behind under Doran's leadership, Oberyn saw little choice. He would not risk the entire mission by refusing to comply, not when Elia's life might be forfeit. And if the king insisted that only 500 could enter, so be it. They would seize Elia and the children by force if they had to, once inside. The city's loyalists were uncertain and frightened. It might not require the entire Dornish host to take control of the Red Keep if it came to that. So Oberyn handpicked 500 of the fiercer, more disciplined men from his vanguard. Many were knights sworn to House Martell. Others were spearmen whose loyalty was unshakable. They donned mail and plate, readied their weapons, and advanced into King's Landing with the Martell banner in front. A sun and spear upon a red field. The city gates creaked open, revealing cramped streets, shuttered shops, and uneasy citizens who peered from windows, fearful of another army in their midst. The smell of rotting refuse and an undercurrent of despair were as thick in the air as the summer heat. Oberyn's men pressed forward in a disciplined column, ignoring curses and jeers from those who suspected they came to loot. The scuff of hooves and the jingle of bridles echoed off dirty walls. At the Red Keep's gates, more gold cloaks awaited, crossbows bristling. Oberyn dismounted and demanded to see Elia Martell. The Gold Cloak's captain, a hard-jawed man with tired eyes, hesitated. "I can arrange that," he said. "But the king has demanded that any audience in the Red Keep be conducted under guard." Oberyn nearly spat. He wanted to march up the steps, demand the release of Elia, and to hell with King Aerys's paranoid commands. But he stilled himself. "Arrange it then, Captain," he said softly, in that voice that spoke of lethal promise if he were crossed. Quickly, inside the Red Keep's halls, everything reeked of fear. Servants dashed by with lowered heads. Some half expected the walls to explode in green fire, for the rumor about wildfire stashes was widely known now. The Mad King's final plan to burn the city if it fell was whispered in corridors. Oberyn felt the tension in each step, saw it etched in the drawn faces of the Targaryen loyalists, who still paced the corridors in their dragon-emblazoned surcoats. They led Oberyn and a small retinue of Dornish knights into a lesser audience chamber, evidently because the throne room was disused or considered unsafe. There, a small man in flamboyant robes awaited them, flanked by 2 members of the King's Guard. The man introduced himself as Grand Maester Pycelle, but Oberyn paid him little mind. His attention snapped to the Kingsguard. Ser Marentrant and Ser Oswell went. He guessed from their appearances, though the white cloaks and plumed helms made them all seem alike. Pycelle droned about the king's trust, the precarious times, the gratitude for Dorne's loyalty. Oberyn cut him short. "I am not here for pleasantries, Grand Maester. I am here for Elia Martell, my sister, and for her children. Where are they?" Before Pycelle could respond, Ser Oswell spoke up in a tense, clipped tone. "They are in Maegor's holdfast under guard. The king has insisted upon their safety, but he is cautious." Aerys, Oberyn translated, was holding them hostage. The Red Viper's heart hammered. At least they were alive for now. But how long would that remain true if Tywin Lannister's men forced the gates, or if the king suspected any betrayal from the Dornish? "I would speak with my sister," Oberyn commanded. "If the king denies me, tell him that is unacceptable." Pycelle gave a tremulous nod, adjusting his chain of many metals. "I shall see what can be done. His Grace's humors are unpredictable of late." His watery eyes slid to the Kingsguard for confirmation. Oberyn's face hardened, and for a moment, the tension in the chamber threatened to erupt in violence. His Dornish guard behind him had hands on hilts, half expecting a treacherous move from the Targaryen loyalists. But Pycelle, with unctuous courtesy, gestured for patience. "Let me speak to his grace," he said, and waddled away. Time stretched on in that stifling chamber. Oberyn refused to let the rest of his men be scattered around the castle, so they stood in uneasy ranks. Servants occasionally passed them, bringing water or offering morsels of food, but nobody touched any plate. Oberyn suspected poison or at least some cunning trick. Ser Oswell remained standing like a statue near the door, while Ser Marentrant had posted himself near a window, watching. Tension hung thick as the summer heat outside. At last, Pycelle returned, flustered, with news that Elia and her children would be escorted to see the Dornish party in a small receiving room off Maegor's Holdfast. Only Oberyn and 2 of his knights would be permitted. The rest had to wait. Oberyn wanted to break the old man's jaw, but he relented. He had to see Elia, had to know she was safe, had to confirm with his own eyes that the children were well. He was led across a drawbridge that connected Maegor's Holdfast to the main keep. Guarding the entrance were more gold cloaks, all on edge. In a wide but austere receiving room with high windows barred by iron, Oberyn finally beheld his sister. She seemed thinner than he remembered, her face pale, her eyes ringed with dark circles. Yet when she saw him, a spark ignited in her weary expression. She wore a simple dress of deep burgundy, no jewels, no Targaryen finery. Clutching her legs was little Rhaenys, dark-haired and frightened. A short distance away, a wet nurse held baby Aegon, who squalled softly. Oberyn's breath caught in his throat. He had pictured this reunion 1,000 times on the road, but the reality was starker. "Elia," he said in a taut whisper, crossing the distance in a few quick strides, ignoring the presence of half a dozen armed guards. She rose shakily, and they embraced. Rhaenys peeked up at him with wide eyes. "Oberyn," Elia murmured. Her voice was hoarse, as if from tears or from nights spent sleepless. "Gods, you came." "I did. I brought men, thousands, to protect you, to save you from—" He trailed off, glancing at the guards. Even mention of the king might draw suspicion, or cause them to lash out in fear. Instead, he carefully pulled back and met her eyes. "Are you well? Have they treated you poorly?" Elia shook her head, though her expression told of constant anxiety. "They keep me locked away for my own protection, or so they say," she explained in a quiet voice. "The king fears everyone. My children have hardly been allowed out of these rooms, aside from daily visits from Pycelle or the Kingsguard. I have no illusions about what might happen if Tywin Lannister arrives." Her eyes flickered. "We'd be hostages or worse. I do not trust the king's mind." Oberyn's anger simmered. "We will take you from here," he vowed, "no matter what it costs." He glanced at the door, saw Ser Marentrant looming. The Kingsguard had ears everywhere. He forced a small smile and turned to Rhaenys, kneeling so he was at eye level with her. "Little princess, you've grown. Do you remember your uncle Oberyn?" She nodded shyly, edging closer to her mother. "I brought you something from Dorne." He gestured to one of his knights, who stepped forward with a small carved wooden flower, intricately painted, merely a token, but it was all they could manage to bring into the holdfast. Rhaenys regarded it with the faintest smile. The door behind them opened abruptly, and into the receiving room swept a new figure. The king's hand, Lord Carlton Chelsted, or so the Dornish had heard was the new hand, though Aerys changed his hands as often as he changed his clothes in recent moons. With him came more guards, and Oberyn recognized the cold eyes of another Kingsguard, Ser Boros Blunt, though all that truly mattered was that these men were the king's men. "You've seen your sister," Chelsted said curtly. "The king permits no further private audiences." He demands to know if House Martell stands with the crown or not. Oberyn rose, biting back a string of curses. House Martell will always protect Elia. If the king stands with her, we stand with him. If not, he let the implication hang in the air. Chelsted's mouth twisted in displeasure. Is that a threat, Prince Oberyn? It is a fact, Oberyn replied evenly. Elia said nothing, but from the way she clutched Rhaenys, it was clear she feared an outbreak of violence right then and there. The wet nurse tried to calm baby Aegon, who began to cry at all the tension. It was an excruciating moment. Oberyn wanted nothing more than to seize his sister's arm and march her out, child in tow, swords drawn on the Targaryen loyalists if need be. But he forced himself to remain still, to avoid any reckless move that might endanger Elia right this moment. His advantage was that thousands of Dornishmen were in the city or just outside, and if the king harmed Elia, he would face a Dornish wrath that even wildfire could not contain. Chelsted cleared his throat. You have your men in the Red Keep, but if they attempt to seize these wards, the king will consider it treason. He has Gi. Ven me the authority to say as much. Oberyn nodded sharply. I hear you. Then he looked to Elia. Take heart, sister. We have come for you. She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. She understood. A city full of suspicious gold cloaks was not the place for an outright confrontation. They would have to wait to plan. And the clock was ticking, for Tywin Lannister could appear at any moment outside the gates. Oberyn left her there under the watchful gaze of the Kingsguard, every stride away from her feeling like a blade twisting in his chest. He returned to the courtyard, stepping out into the muggy air with his knights at his side. He had learned enough. Elia was alive, but effectively a hostage. To free her, Oberyn would have to outmaneuver or overpower the Kingsguard. But with a well-fortified keep and wildfire rumored to be stored beneath the city, that was no small feat. One bit of good news came when a messenger rushed up to announce that Prince Doran's larger force had arrived outside the gates. They were encamped to the east, near the Blackwater, awaiting word. Back in the Great Yard, Oberyn met with the highest Dornish officers among his 500 and shared the dire situation. They stood in a tight knot near the stables, the bustle of the keep around them. The king refuses to relinquish Elia and the children, Oberyn said, voice low. He trusts no one, and that includes us. We have an army, but so does he, at least in the form of the gold cloaks and the loyal elements of the Targaryen forces still here. Storming Maegor's holdfast is not so simple. And we cannot simply open the gates to let our entire army in, or the king will see it as a coup. What if we do orchestrate a coup? Muttered one of the knights. He was a lordling of the Wells family, known for his hot temper. This king is mad by all accounts. Why not place the princess under our immediate protection and hold the Red Keep ourselves? Oberyn considered it. We must be cautious. Robert Baratheon and his rebels will come soon, or Tywin Lannister. Or both. If we seize the keep and appear to stand as Targaryen loyalists, we'll be destroyed by the rebels. If we appear to hold the keep against the Targaryens, we risk Aerys ordering his pyromancers to burn us all. The city is full of hidden wildfire, or so it is rumored. He looked at them gravely. But we might have no choice if Tywin arrives. We cannot allow Elia to remain a pawn. They had no illusions about King Aerys. He had shown callous disregard for Elia's well-being in the past, but not enough to spark open conflict with Dorne while Rhaegar lived. Now that Rhaegar was gone, Aerys might do anything. They would need a cunning plan, one that secured Elia swiftly and without giving the Mad King time to unleash his worst. Late that evening, Oberyn left the Red Keep under cover of darkness, escorted by a group of gold cloaks who insisted they must watch every move. He returned to the outer gates, where Doran and the main host camped. Quietly, in the dark, the two brothers conferred. Doran's face was drawn with worry, but beneath that calm exterior, Oberyn could sense rage and fear. They had come all this way, only to find Elia behind a fortress of paranoia. The city might soon be under siege by Tywin or Robert. Each passing day increased the risk that Aerys would do something desperate, or that the Lannisters would arrive. So the Martell princes devised a plan. They would request an official audience with the king on the morrow, presumably to declare House Martell's renewed loyalty and to offer their troops in defense of King's Landing. If Aerys agreed, Doran and Oberyn together would enter the Red Keep with a large honor guard, perhaps 200 men. The remainder of the Dornish forces would remain just inside the gate or posted along the city walls as though forming a defensive line against the rebels. Under the guise of strengthening the city's defenses, they would move loyal Dornishmen into positions near Maegor's Holdfast and other critical points. Then, when the moment was ripe, they would cut off Aerys' loyalists from the princess. If the king resisted or threatened Elia in any way, they would forcibly remove her to safety. It was a delicate gambit, dependent on the king's unpredictability. If Aerys refused them an audience or smelled a trap, he might kill Elia or try to set the entire city aflame. But if the Martells did nothing, Tywin might come with thousands of Lannisters, forcibly take the city, and exact a cruel vengeance on Elia and her children, arguing that they were Targaryens and needed to be exterminated for Robert's claim to be uncontested. As for Robert Baratheon, he might show mercy, but that was a flimsy hope at best. The entire fate of Dorne and Elia hinged on boldness, so they resolved to act. Come morning, the official request was sent to the Red Keep. Prince Doran Martell and his brother Prince Oberyn humbly requested an audience with King Aerys II Targaryen to offer the full support of Dorne in defending the capital. The answer was not immediate. The sun crawled higher in the sky. Dornish officers and men waited anxiously, making small talk, checking their weapons, glancing at the city walls. Then, shortly after midday, a royal herald emerged. His Grace will receive the princes of Dorne in the throne room. Doran and Oberyn exchanged tense looks. The throne room, the hall of the Iron Throne, from which Aerys had historically pronounced his cruelest sentences. That was hardly an auspicious location, but better to be in the open than trapped in some lesser chamber. At least there, any immediate violence would be witnessed by the assembled lords and gold cloaks, lessening the chance of a swift execution. Possibly, under heavy guard, Doran, Oberyn, and 200 Dornish knights and spearmen marched in formation from the city gates to the Red Keep. The weight of eyes followed them the entire way. Peasants, city watchmen, Targaryen loyalists, a few passing lords, all uncertain what this show of strength meant. The banners of House Martell fluttered, bright against the dull stone. No one cheered. No one quite dared to jeer. Everyone sensed the tension. They filed into the Red Keep's outer yard, then into the corridors leading to the Great Hall, the gold cloaks guiding them. Oberyn strode at the front, eyes roving for potential ambush. Doran followed, his face calm but his posture stiff with worry. The sound of boots on marble echoed in the vast corridors. At last, they stepped through massive double doors into the cavernous throne room. Light streamed in from high windows, illuminating motes of dust that danced in the air. Aerys sat upon the Iron Throne. He was a gaunt figure, with long, unkempt silver hair and fingernails grown into talons. His eyes flickered wildly. To his right stood a cluster of Kingsguard knights, their white armor bright in the sunbeams. To his left, Pycelle and a few other courtiers hovered anxiously. Behind the throne, half hidden, Oberyn glimpsed the flicker of gold cloaks with crossbows. This would be a delicate dance indeed. Aerys' voice came thin and reedy from his perch atop the twisted swords. Approach. Doran inclined his head and walked forward, Oberyn at his side. The retinue fanned out behind them in disciplined lines, the Martell banners at the fore. The hush in the chamber was absolute. Doran cleared his throat. Your Grace, Dorne stands ready to defend your city from any who would do harm to the crown. We have brought our spears and swords in loyalty to the throne, as pledged when Elia Martell married Prince Rhaegar. Aerys' eyes flitted from Doran to Oberyn. His lips curled. Your loyalty is suspect. Did you not hide in your desert while the rebels made war on me? Did you not keep your men away from the battlefield, leaving my dear Rhaegar to fight alone? His laugh was high and mirthless. And now you come. Why? Doran kept his composure. Your Grace, we were not called upon by Prince Rhaegar to join him in open battle, as the war turned quickly. We believed our best chance to serve the crown was to safeguard the supply lines in the south. Now, with the rebels pressing upon the capital, we have come to reinforce your defenses." Every word was measured, the lies delivered smoothly. Ares peered down at them from atop the throne's spiky metal. "Or perhaps you come to steal what remains of my rule," he hissed. "The Lannisters have marched. They have camped west of the city, or so I am told. The Tyrells remain in the Reach, and you, the Martells, slither in with a host of desert swords. Perhaps I should burn you all." His eyes were wide, bloodshot. Oberyn did not hold his tongue. He stepped forward. "We have come to protect our family, your grace. Princess Elia and her children. We are loyal to her, to them, and by extension we are loyal to you." He gazed up, unafraid, though many knights behind him felt their hearts lurch at his boldness. "We only ask that you allow our men to help hold the walls. Let us prove our loyalty in action, not in words." For a long moment, Ares stared, as if deciding whether to order them cut down on the spot. The Kingsguard tensed, hands on sword hilts. Doran and Oberyn stood rigid, prepared for the worst. Then the king began to laugh, a wet, rasping cackle that echoed around the hall. Yes, defend the walls," he crooned. "Defend them if you wish, but you shall not come near Maegor's holdfast, you hear me? My grandchildren remain safe in my care. I trust no one else." A wave of relief and frustration swept through the Dornish at once. Ares had granted them partial access but still kept Elia and her children as hostages. Doran bowed. "We understand, your grace. May it please you to assign us sections of the outer walls to man, so that the city's defenses might be strengthened." The king motioned irritably to Chelstead, his hand. "Coordinate them, you incompetent fool," Ares said, his voice lilting with madness. "Put them where you will, but keep them away from my children. Away!" Then, in a dramatic swirl of tattered royal robes, the king rose and descended the steps of the throne, ignoring the sharp edges of the melted swords. The Kingsguard moved with him. Everyone else parted, bowing their heads as he swept by, though many trembled at how close his mania was to an outburst. He did not so much as glance at the Dornish again as he left the hall. In the king's wake, Lord Chelstead approached, careful to keep his voice cordial. "Princes of Dorne, I shall instruct the city watch to give you access to the walls. We can place some of your men in the gatehouses as well, but the King's Guard will remain in control of the Red Keep." He spoke with a forced politeness, perhaps wanting to avoid a direct confrontation. After all, the Dornish outnumbered the Gold Cloaks now. If a battle erupted here in the Great Hall, it would be bloody for both sides. Oberyn managed a thin smile. "We are here to help. Let us see the defenses. We can position our archers along the ramparts, form a reserve in the courtyard if the gates are breached. Our main camp is just outside the city, though many more are eager to enter should the king require them." "Yes, well, let us hope that remains unnecessary," Chelstead said blandly, then turned to lead them out. Doran followed, heart pounding. Every step deeper into the Red Keep's labyrinth of corridors was a step away from open fields, away from a quick retreat. This was a nest of vipers, yet the Martells had no choice. They had to be here to be ready if the worst came. As the day wore on, Dornish detachments spread through the city walls, manning parapets alongside Gold Cloaks. The heat was sweltering, the smell of tanners and fish markets wafting up from the city below. The common folk regarded these new arrivals with a mix of suspicion and hope. Some whispered that the Dornish must be allied with the Targaryens and that soon a great battle would break out in the streets. Others wondered if the Dornish might hold the line and keep out the rumored Lannister men. Meanwhile, Oberyn assigned small squads to strategic points near the Red Keep's gates, near the stables, near the granaries. He wanted a path clear for them if and when they decided to strike for Elia. A day passed, then another. Tensions simmered in the city, as watchers on the walls scanned every horizon for the arrival of the Lannister host. Some said the rebels under Robert Baratheon were massing to the north, prepared to close in as well. The Gold Cloaks grew wary of their new Dornish comrades. Fights broke out in taverns between off-duty soldiers, each accusing the other of sabotage or treachery. Doran and Oberyn tried to maintain discipline among their men. But as the hours stretched, the weight of uncertainty pressed on everyone. At last, a messenger came galloping through the gate on a foaming horse, dusty and breathless. He carried tidings that shook the city. The Lannisters had been spotted crossing the Blackwater Rush to the west, flying the Lion of Casterly Rock. Thousands strong, they approached. The watchman on the city's western walls soon confirmed it. Tywin Lannister was at the gates, proclaiming that he had come to aid King Aerys. The gold cloaks, uncertain, looked to the king for orders. But the king had retreated deep into Maegor's holdfast, refusing to come forth, leaving Lord Chelsted to handle the matter. Lord Chelsted, equally unsure, called for a war council, inviting the Dornish princes. The question was simple. Should the gates be opened to Tywin Lannister, or should he be treated as an enemy? The Targaryen cause was in disarray. Nobody had a sure answer. On the one hand, House Lannister had sat out most of the rebellion, presumably to see which way the wind blew. Now that Robert Baratheon was poised to triumph, many suspected that Tywin was only here to ensure he ended up on the winning side. On the other hand, Tywin Lannister had once been Hand of the King for many years, and he claimed to come as a loyal servant. The city's defenders, fearing a two-front assault from both Tywin and Robert, had to decide quickly. The War Council convened in the Queen's Ballroom, a large chamber with tall windows. Doran and Oberyn arrived to find Chelsted, Pycelle, Varys the Spymaster, whom Oberyn eyed warily, several city watch captains, and a handful of minor lords who had remained loyal to Aerys. Oberyn had never met Varys before, and he found the man unnerving, with his soft smile and gliding movements. Varys, for his part, gave the Dornish princes a deep bow and an oily greeting. "Such valiant defenders of the realm," he murmured in that silken voice. "We are truly fortunate to have so many protectors for our dear king." Chelsted began the discussion. "Tywin Lannister's host is arrayed outside the Lion Gate. They have sent riders to parley, claiming they come in peace, seeking only to protect the city from the rebels." Oberyn barked a short laugh. "Tywin Lannister is many things, but a friend of the crown? He has watched from the sidelines until now, waiting for an opportunity. If we open the gates, we invite a lion into our midst. I say we keep them shut." Lord Giles Rosby, a timid man, spoke up. "But what if the king wants the Lannisters admitted? Lord Tywin was once Hand. Perhaps he truly does mean to defend King's Landing." "Or sack it," said Oberyn, eyes flashing. "He is known for his ruthlessness. The moment that gate is opened, the city belongs to him." Doran held up a hand to rein in his brother's fury. "We must be measured here. If we openly defy Tywin, we risk a siege we can ill afford. King's Landing is not provisioned for a long siege, especially with so many refugees. And there is talk that Robert Baratheon is close behind. 2 armies might converge on us." Chelsted's face was drawn. "His Grace has locked himself in his chambers and left no instructions beyond not allowing any man near the royal family. The choice appears to fall to us. We cannot simply leave Lord Tywin to starve outside our walls. His men might attack." Varys cleared his throat. "If I might counsel caution, Lord Tywin is known for cunning, yes, but also for efficiency. He does not tarry in lost causes, nor does he champion them unless he has a plan. For him to arrive now, in such force, I suspect it is not purely out of loyalty." He smiled apologetically. "However, a parley might glean more about his intentions. If we appear too hostile, he will storm the walls. If we appear too trusting, we may end up with a lion's claws at our throats. Perhaps a measured approach." Chelsted nodded. "We can meet his envoys outside the gates, gauge their demands, and stall for time. Meanwhile, the Dornish and gold cloaks can man the walls. If Tywin tries anything, we seal the gates. Do so quickly," Oberyn advised. "He who controls the gatehouses controls the city, and I doubt Lannister's men will wait forever." So it was decided. They would not immediately open the gates, but they would agree to a parley. The council ended, and Oberyn marched out, already formulating his own plan. He pulled Doran aside. "I fear a trick. If Tywin is admitted, he will take the city, and then it will be a matter of time before he gets to Elia. We cannot let that happen. Better the Mad King than Tywin." Doran nodded grimly. "I agree. We must be ready to act at a moment's notice. If Lannister is allowed in, the Gold Cloaks might change their allegiance to him as soon as he crosses the threshold. We can't chance it." He laid a hand on his brother's shoulder. "Oberyn, be ready to move on Maegor's Holdfast if we must. Have our best men standing by in the courtyard stables. If the Lannisters break in or if the City Watch turns cloak, we grab Elia and the children and fight our way out or hold a section of the city." Oberyn gave a curt nod. "I'll see it done." That afternoon, Tywin Lannister's envoys arrived outside the Lion Gate, which remained closed and barred. On the walls above stood a line of gold cloaks and Dornish archers. Several Targaryen loyalists watched from the battlements. Down at ground level, a small sally port opened, and out rode Lord Chelsted, accompanied by a handful of knights, Dornish and Crown alike, to meet the Lannister envoys in a field. From the walls, Oberyn used a Myrish lens to watch the scene unfold. He saw the red-cloaked Lannister men, shining in the afternoon sun, a large contingent behind them. The banners of the lions snapped in the breeze, and among them stood a man in golden armor. Even from a distance, Oberyn recognized Tywin's posture. Straight-backed, imperious, not to be trifled with. They talked for some time. From his vantage, Oberyn could not hear, but he saw gestures and the occasional emphatic wave of a hand. In the end, Chelsted turned and rode back toward the gate. The Lannisters did not budge from their positions. They merely watched. Some distance behind them lay a host that dwarfed any city watch muster. The gold and crimson lines of soldiers extended back a fair distance, carrying siege equipment. The message was clear. If Tywin was not admitted peacefully, he had the means to batter down the walls. Chelsted returned inside the gates. Oberyn hurried down from the ramparts to hear the news. The hand looked ashen. "Lord Tywin demands immediate entrance, offering his fealty and assistance to the king," Chelsted reported. "But he insists the gates be opened within the hour. If we refuse, he will consider the crown to have spurned his loyalty, and he will attack." "Attack," Oberyn muttered. "He might as well say, sack the city." Doran frowned. "We must speak with Aerys. He must decide." They went to the Red Keep. The Mad King, however, refused to leave his locked chamber. They hammered on the door, pleaded, sent messages via the Kingsguard. At last, the king shouted through the door in a voice laced with hysteria, "They shall not enter. They come to kill me and my heirs. Burn them all." "What would you have us do, your grace?" Chelsted cried, desperate. "I said burn them," came the shriek from within. "Open the gates, let them in, then burn them all with wildfire. It will be a glorious inferno." Chelsted and the assembled men stood appalled. Doran and Oberyn exchanged a horrified glance. This was no idle threat. There were rumors that caches of wildfire had been placed throughout the city. If Aerys was truly giving the order to let Tywin inside and then unleash wildfire on them, the entire city might be consumed. The king intended to punish Tywin's perceived betrayal by incinerating friend and foe alike. Chelsted's horror was evident on his face. "Your grace, that is madness. You would destroy King's Landing. Better the city burn than fall to traitors." Aerys screeched from behind the door. "Now go. Do as I command." The men retreated from the corridor, shaken. Chelsted turned to Doran. "This is what we feared. If we open the gates, the king will order the pyromancers to set off the wildfire. If we refuse, Tywin attacks from outside. Either way, the city is doomed unless we do something." Oberyn's jaw tightened. "Then we do something." He looked to his brother. "We seize the king, remove him from power before he can give that order. Or we kill him if he refuses to yield. We rescue Elia. We either fight Tywin at the gates or negotiate from a position of strength. But we cannot allow Aerys to remain in command. If the gold cloaks or the Kingsguard resist, we cut them down. A mad king is a danger to us all. Chelstid sighed. You speak treason. Doran placed a hand on Chelstid's shoulder. Treason to save the realm, my lord. Sometimes it is the only choice. Will you stand with us? Chelstid nodded grimly. You have my blessing to do what must be done. But be quick about it. I fear that if Lord Tywin does not see the gates open soon, he will commence his attack. So it began. The final stroke that House Martell had dreaded yet prepared for. Doran and Oberyn quickly assembled a loyal force of Dornish knights and selected gold cloaks known to be disillusioned with the king's madness. The plan was swift and direct. They would converge on Maegor's Holdfast, overrun the king's guard if necessary, and take Aerys prisoner. If Aerys tried to call for wildfire, they would silence him. Meanwhile, a smaller detachment would secure Elia and her children. In the courtyard, Oberyn readied the men. We do this for Dorne, he told them in a low voice. We do this for Princess Elia and for the thousands of innocents in this city who would otherwise burn. The king is mad. He must be stopped. They nodded, resolute. Swords were drawn, shields hefted. The sky had begun to redden with dusk, as if portending the blood that might soon be spilled. Under the guise of changing the guard, the Dornish marched across the drawbridge leading to Maegor's Holdfast. Targaryen loyalists at the portcullis let them pass, unaware that anything was amiss. But on the far side, at the gates of the inner fortress, a pair of Kingsguard knights stood alert, Ser Boros Blunt and Ser Meryn Trant. They saw the armed column approach and demanded to know its purpose. We have orders from the king to reinforce the Holdfast, Oberyn lied smoothly. Ser Meryn Trant's eyes narrowed. The king gave us no such orders. Then Oberyn said, the king is ours now. He lunged with the speed of a striking viper, thrusting his spear forward. The tip punched through the gap in Meryn Trant's armor beneath his arm. The white cloak staggered, mouth agape, blood spurting from his side. With a roar, Ser Boros tried to swing his sword, but Dornish knights overwhelmed him, hammering him down with their shields and stabbing relentlessly. In moments, both Kingsguard lay motionless on the stones, their white cloaks soaked crimson. A shout rose from inside. Gold cloaks loyal to Aerys rushed forward, but the Dornish pressed ahead, overwhelming them with disciplined ranks. Sparks flew as blades clashed in the narrow corridor. Oberyn's spear flashed left and right, dropping foes with lethal precision. Doran stayed in the second rank, directing men around corners and ensuring they sealed off any route from which reinforcements might come. Deeper into the Holdfast they went, scattering servants and lesser guards who yielded before the mass of spears. The stench of fear hung in the air. Oberyn barked orders to a small detachment. Find Elia's chambers. Protect her at all costs. Those men sped down a side hallway, guided by a frightened servant who claimed to know the way. Oberyn pressed on toward the king's chambers, following the corridor that spiraled upward. The final defenders put up a fierce fight. Two more Kingsguard knights, identified as Ser Jonathan Darry and Ser Oswell Went, stood in shining white armor, swords in hand, flanked by a handful of Targaryen household guards. Traitors! One of them roared as they saw the Martell men approach. Darry and Went charged, their white cloaks billowing behind them. Oberyn's men surged to meet them, but the Kingsguard were formidable, their blades flashing with deadly skill. Oberyn engaged Ser Oswell Went, spear against longsword. Metal rang in the cramped corridor. Twice, Went nearly struck a killing blow, but Oberyn twisted aside, as lithe as any duelist in the known world, returning with quick thrusts that tested the knight's defense. Meanwhile, Doran's men pinned Ser Jonathan Darry against a wall, but three Dornish spearmen fell to his sword before one of them managed to drive a blade into a gap in his armor. Darry collapsed in a heap, mortally wounded, still lashing out until the last breath. Oberyn fainted high, then swept his spear low, hooking Went's ankle. The Kingsguard toppled and tried to roll aside, but Oberyn jammed the spear point into the knight's chest with brutal force. The white armor buckled, a final cry escaping Went's lips before he fell still. Panting, Oberyn yanked the spear free, stepping over the dead man's body. He cast a quick glance at his own men, the injured leaning against walls or pressing bloody hands to wounds. The cost was growing. They reached the king's chamber door, barricaded from the inside. Oberyn could hear Aerys shrieking for pyromancers, for wildfire, for them to burn it all. "Burn them! Burn them!" he howled. "You fools, obey me!" The Dornish battered down the door with axes and swords. Splintered, they rushed inside to find King Aerys, wild-eyed, half-mad with terror and fury, a cowering Grand Maester Pycelle at his side. Aerys' robes were in disarray, and a jagged, broken sword lay at his feet. He was unarmed, yet the look in his eyes was that of a cornered beast. "Traitors!" he spat, flecks of foam on his lips. "I am the king. I will have your heads. Burn them all. Burn them." He never finished. Oberyn sprang forward and slammed the butt of his spear into Aerys' temple, dropping him to the floor. Several men rushed in, seizing the king's arms, binding him. Pycelle moaned in dismay, stumbling back. "Spare him, my lords. He is still the king." The realm be damned," Oberyn hissed. "He was about to burn the city. We'll keep him alive for now. But if any pyromancer so much as lights a candle, I'll kill Aerys myself." He gestured for 2 knights to stand guard over the unconscious king, then turned to Pycelle. "Where are those pyromancers?" I don't know," Pycelle stammered. "They could be in the dungeons near the stores. But, oh, my lords, if they have instructions." Oberyn seized the Grand Maester by his chain. "Then we stop them." He flung Pycelle aside. "Show us the way, or you die now." "Why, yes, of course," Pycelle babbled. Come, the alchemical chambers are below." Before Oberyn could follow up, a breathless Dornish knight appeared at the door. "Prince Oberyn, we have Princess Elia, she's safe. But the children," his voice trembled. "They weren't with her. We think the king had separated them. We're searching the holdfast." Oberyn's heart lurched. "Find them. Spare no effort. We must get the children before any foe does." He turned to Doran. "Brother, I'll go below with Pycelle to secure the wildfire. You find Elia, or go with the men searching for the children. We cannot let them fall into enemy hands." Doran nodded, face pale, lips set in a grim line. "I will see it done." Thus they split. Oberyn stormed down the winding staircases with a squad of Dornish spearmen and Pycelle tottering before them, leading the way. Torches flickered in the depths, the air growing stale and hot. In the black bowels of the Red Keep, far below the Great Hall, they found the pyromancer's labs. Greenish light glowed from hidden alcoves. The alchemists themselves cowered at the sound of marching feet. Some tried to defend themselves with half-finished concoctions, but the Dornish easily overpowered them. Oberyn wasted no time in threats, ordering the men to kill any pyromancer who dared try to ignite wildfire. They found casks and pots of the volatile substance stacked like a fool's treasure hoard. Carefully, under Oberyn's watch, the Dornish men doused the area with water and pulled some of the smaller pots aside. They posted guards in every corridor leading to this chamber, ensuring no last-minute sabotage. Up above, the holdfast corridors rang with shouts as Martell knights and gold cloaks clashed with pockets of Targaryen diehards. Some refused to yield, swearing to defend the king. Others threw down weapons, seeing that the king had fallen. Meanwhile, Doran joined the search for the royal heirs. Elia had been found in a side suite, guarded by half a dozen of the household guard. The Dornish overcame them with minimal bloodshed, and Elia was rushed to relative safety under guard. But Rhaenys and Aegon were still missing. Panic gnawed at Doran as he combed the corridors. He could scarcely imagine the heartbreak if the children were lost, Elia's hope, and perhaps the future of the Targaryen line. It was a pair of gold cloaks loyal to the Martells who finally stumbled upon the nursery chamber. Inside, they found little Prince Aegon wailing in his crib, apparently forgotten in the chaos. His wet nurse had been killed by a stray arrow. She lay crumpled in the corner. The men snatched up the child, wrapping him in a cloak. But Princess Rhaenys was nowhere to be seen. Fear spurred them onward. Shouting out her name, they searched room after room. At last, they heard a muffled cry from behind a locked door. Doran kicked it open. There she was, trembling and tear-stained, hidden under a bed. A young maid had locked the door from the inside, hoping to keep the princess safe. The maid, too frightened to show herself, almost screamed when Doran's men burst in. But the relief was profound. Rhaenys was alive. Doran gathered her in his arms, comforting her. "You're safe now," he whispered, though his heart still pounded with terror. If Lannister forces broke in, no one would be safe. They needed to secure the city walls, and quickly. Clutching the child, he and his men hurried back to the suite where Elia waited, under the guard of Martell knights. There was a tearful reunion. Elia sobbed as she held her children, relief washing over her like a monsoon rain in the desert. While this drama played out in Maegor's Holdfast, the city watchers on the walls saw the Lannister host begin to stir. Trumpets blared, and siege towers rolled forward. Tywin had evidently run out of patience. If the gates would not open, he would smash them. The gold cloaks atop the walls, uncertain of whether the king yet lived or if the Dornish had taken over, hesitated to defend or to surrender. Meanwhile, Dornish archers manned the battlements. The swirling confusion grew. The Lannisters advanced. They had catapults, battering rams, thousands of disciplined men. A standoff brewed that threatened to erupt into a full-scale assault. Back in the Holdfast, Oberyn emerged from the depths, green smudges on his boots from where small casks of wildfire had leaked. "We have neutralized the threat of wildfire," he announced to Doran, who had joined him in the corridor near the king's chamber, children and sister safe behind a line of Dornish spears. "The pyromancers have been detained or killed." He exhaled a shaky breath, glancing at Elia and the children. A spark of fierce satisfaction lit his eyes at seeing them together. "We did it, brother. We saved them." But Doran's gaze was drawn out a nearby window, through which the setting sun illuminated a dust cloud rising in the west. The Lannister host was beginning its move. "The war is not over," he said quietly. "Tywin is at the gates, and we hold the king hostage. This city is leaderless. If the gold cloaks do not rally to us, Tywin will batter us down." Oberyn's lips parted in a grim smile. "Then let's see how Tywin likes facing a city that is prepared. We'll hold the walls. We have thousands of Dornishmen inside and more out in the camps. We can keep him out, or we can open the gates on our terms and crush him in a trap. With the king in our hands, we hold the highest bargaining chip of all. Perhaps Tywin will parley." Elia, cradling Aegon, looked up with haunted eyes. "And if he wins anyway? He despises the Targaryens, despises our house. We must not let him near the children." Doran placed a hand on her shoulder. "We will not." His voice trembled with emotion, but he forced steady resolve. "I promise you, Elia, we will never let him touch you or your children." At that moment, a messenger arrived, panting, to say that the outer gates were under assault. Catapults pounded the walls, and Lannister footmen advanced with tall ladders. The gold cloaks, leaderless and terrified, seemed likely to yield. Already some were shouting to open the gates and surrender. But the Dornish men on the walls, proud and determined, refused, returning arrow fire. Oberyn nodded curtly. "We go to the walls. Doran, keep Elia and the children guarded here in the Holdfast. I will lead our men in defense. If we can repulse Tywin's first assault, we might force him to negotiate." Doran agreed. He pressed Oberyn's hand. "Be careful, brother." Summoning the Dornish knights, Oberyn sprinted through the Red Keep's corridors, out into the city, and up onto the battlements. The sound of war was deafening. The crash of boulders on stone, the whistling of arrows, the shouts of men. Smoke billowed from fires started by flaming shot. The sun dipped below the horizon, bathing the battlefield in a hellish glow. On the western walls, Lannister men surged forward with siege ladders, while a battery ram hammered at the Lion Gate. Oberyn took command. "Archers, focus on their ladder crews. Spearmen, station yourselves at the parapets. Gold cloaks, you fight beside us or you're of no use. Choose now. Some gold cloaks fled, but enough remained, perhaps out of fear or perhaps out of respect for the Dornish presence. Shoulder to shoulder they fought. Night fell swiftly. The Lannisters poured in, seemingly endless, but the walls held. Men tumbled from ladders, screaming. The Lion Gate was battered repeatedly, but each time, the Dornish defenders poured flaming oil down through murder holes, forcing the ram operators to retreat. Torches lit the ramparts, giving glimpses of the chaos. Bodies strewn about, arrows protruding from the dead, smoke curling in the heated air. Oberyn personally led a defense of a siege tower that managed to disgorge Lannister knights onto the ramparts. In a swirl of spear and sword, he dueled their captain on the narrow wall walk, slipping past the man's guard to spear him through the throat. Despite the furious assault, the Lannisters had not yet gained a foothold by midnight. The battered remains of their first wave fell back, leaving the ground before the walls thick with corpses. From the top of the battlements, Oberyn glared down at the retreating lines. His mouth tasted of ash and blood. "Tywin will not stop," he murmured, turning to his knights. "But we've shown him the price of taking this city by force." Another volley of stones crashed against the walls, sending dust and fragments flying. Oberyn shielded his face, coughing. His men began to gather the wounded, piling bodies where they could. The moans of the dying filled the darkness. If Tywin launched another assault at dawn, it could be even more devastating. But the city still held for now. As the long night wore on, a messenger arrived under a white flag from the Lannister camp. He was escorted into the city and brought to Oberyn on the ramparts. By torchlight, the messenger delivered Tywin's proposal. Surrender King Aerys, open the gates, and the Lannisters would spare the city from sack. Elia and her children would be treated with respect, though Robert Baratheon would surely demand an end to the Targaryen line. Oberyn spat over the wall. "Tell your lord we have no intention of surrendering. We hold the city, we hold the king, and we will not yield to false promises. If Tywin wants King's Landing, let him try again. But I promise him that for every yard he gains, we will exact a dreadful toll." The messenger frowned. "Then he will assault the walls again. More will die, and House Martell will be held responsible for the devastation." Oberyn stepped forward, face illuminated by flickering torchlight. "If Tywin wants to negotiate further, let him come himself and kneel before the walls. Else we meet in blood at dawn." The messenger's mouth tightened, but he bowed stiffly and withdrew. A hush fell over the walls again, broken only by the groans of the wounded. The battered city lay in darkness, lit here and there by pockets of flame where catapult shot had started small fires. The dawn threatened more blood. Oberyn's men gritted their teeth, preparing for the next onslaught or for a possible chance at negotiations. Tywin, cunning as ever, might not rush a second wave. He might starve the city instead, or attempt a cunning infiltration. Oberyn prepared for both. At the Red Keep, King Aerys remained bound and under guard, half-conscious, muttering to himself. Grand Maester Pycelle hovered, pleading for mercy, but the Dornish knights sneered at him. Meanwhile, Elia and her children stayed in secure chambers, with a squad of knights stationed at every door and corridor. Doran paced, awaiting word from Oberyn on the walls. He prayed silently that come morning, Tywin would realize an outright attack was folly. In his heart, he knew Tywin would never accept a partial victory. The Lion would want everything. When the pale light of dawn crept over the horizon, horns sounded from the Lannister lines. Siege engines rumbled forward once more, but as they closed half the distance, another horn called out from the north. War horns that did not belong to Tywin. From the heights of the city walls, the defenders saw dust clouds approaching from the Rose Road. A new army marched, banners of the Black Stag on a golden field. Robert Baratheon had arrived. In the swirling dust, the Stag and Fury banners advanced, accompanied by men from the Vale, the Stormlands, and what seemed to be some of the Northmen. They were fresh from their victory on the Trident. At their vanguard rode a huge warrior in black armor, a warhammer across his saddle. Robert. Next to him, men said, was Eddard Stark, the quiet lord of Winterfell. They approached the city in force, perhaps to confront the Targaryens, and now found the Lannisters laying siege. Oberyn and his men watched in tense silence as the newly arrived rebels confronted Tywin's lines. From the wall, it was impossible to hear their words, but they saw frantic gestures, heated arguments. The Lannisters seemed to withdraw some of their siege equipment to face this new threat. Baratheon's cavalry was no small matter. If Tywin tried to maintain the siege while also fighting Robert, he might be caught in a pincer. Atop the ramparts, Oberyn exhaled with cautious relief. Now Tywin has to fight on two fronts if he wants this city. Or he might ally with Robert. But Robert knows better than to let the lion in so easily. He shot a glance at his knights. Perhaps this is our chance. Let them weaken each other. If we hold firm, we might keep Elia safe until both sides see reason. The sun rose higher, revealing the lines of steel in both armies beyond the walls. The city's defenders mustered again, patching up the battered gate with timbers, gathering arrows. Meanwhile, outside, Robert Baratheon rode forth to parley with Tywin Lannister. Those with the keenest eyes on the walls thought they saw furious gestures from Robert, though Tywin remained imperious. No doubt Tywin offered to help dethrone the Targaryens, while Robert demanded the city be surrendered to him as the rightful victor. In the end, the two armies drew back, each forming its own camp, leaving the city's battered western walls unmolested for now. The day wore on, with no renewed attack from either side. Messengers were exchanged between Tywin and Robert, but from the vantage of the walls, it was clear they had not reached a true accord. The presence of Dornish defenders within the city complicated matters. Robert might want to dethrone Aerys, but he likely cared little for the method so long as the Targaryen line was ended. Meanwhile, Tywin wanted to seize the city or be recognized as the power behind the throne. The standoff could lead to a sudden alliance or a sudden clash. Inside King's Landing, chaos reigned among the small folk. Rumors spread that Aerys was a captive of the Dornish, that the city's gates were closed by Martell spears. Some whispered that a new king might be crowned soon, Rhaegar's infant son with Dorne as regent. Others feared the rebels would soon storm in and kill them all. The tension seemed ready to snap. Doran and Oberyn moved swiftly to restore order. They gave out bread from the granaries to the starving masses, ensuring the gold cloaks who remained loyal patrolled the streets alongside Dornish spearmen. Word was spread. The city was under the protection of House Martell. The king had lost his senses and was in custody, preventing him from burning them all. This was not greeted with universal relief, but it quelled some of the panic. At least for a time, there was no immediate violence within the walls. As for Elia, she stayed close to her children, seldom leaving the secure chambers. She had wept with relief when she learned that the king's wildfire plot was thwarted. But every new rumor of a Lannister infiltration attempt or a Baratheon bombardment made her tremble anew. All she wanted was to flee this cursed city and return to Sunspear, far from the ambitions of the Iron Throne. Yet Oberyn counseled patience. If they tried to slip away now, they might be caught by Lannister outriders or worse. Night fell again, the second since Tywin's arrival, and King's Landing remained in Dornish hands. Outside the walls, two great armies camped, each with its own designs. Oberyn wondered if the following day would see the forging of a pact between Robert and Tywin to join forces and storm the city in a single massive attack. He posted extra men at the gates, readied the catapults inside the walls, and prepared to fight to the last if it came to that. Yet in his heart, he questioned if it was all hopeless. Doran, more inclined to diplomacy, penned letters through the night, addressed to Robert Baratheon and to Eddard Stark, explaining that King Aerys was in custody, that the city would not fight the rebels if guaranteed the safety of Elia and her children. He urged them to treat with House Martell, promising that if Robert wanted the crown, the Dornish would not stand in his way, provided Elia and her children were spared. The letters were smuggled out of the city by a cunning route, slipping past Lannister sentries in the darkness. Their fate was uncertain, but Doran prayed that one might reach Robert or Stark. A compromise might be possible, especially if Robert held no personal grudge against Elia herself. Indeed, Robert's wrath was mainly for Rhaegar and the Targaryens who had ordered the death of his beloved Lyanna. Elia was simply an unfortunate piece on the board. Perhaps an agreement could be reached. As the next dawn broke, horns sounded anew from Robert's camp. Lannister trumpets answered, echoing across the plains. The city watch braced, expecting a combined assault. But instead, riders from both armies converged under a white banner of peace. They approached the city gate. Oberyn, from the walls, saw a large man astride a warhorse. Robert, no doubt, and beside him the distinctive gold armor of Tywin. Eddard Stark was also present, silent and solemn in gray. They had come to talk. A herald called up to the walls. "Open the gate so Lord Tywin Lannister, Lord Robert Baratheon, and Lord Eddard Stark may treat with those who hold the city. We come in peace, under a flag of truce." Oberyn hesitated. Letting them inside was dangerous, but a parley was better than a bloodbath. He glanced at Doran, who stood beside him on the wall, and at Elia, who had come to see from a distance, escorted by knights. She looked pale but determined. "Let them in," Doran said at last. "But only them and a small retinue. We outnumber them inside the gate, so they cannot easily betray us." So the gates opened partially, and in rode 3 great lords, each with a few men, their banners lowered as a sign of truce. The gate closed behind them, sealed by Dornish spearmen. They were escorted to the courtyard. The scene was tense beyond measure. Robert Baratheon, broad-shouldered, a thundercloud scowl on his face, Tywin Lannister, aloof and proud, and Eddard Stark, calm as winter. All 3 gazed around at the Dornish men who lined the walls and yard, spears in hand. Bloodstains still marred the stones from the previous fighting. Doran and Oberyn emerged, flanked by a dozen knights. Behind them stood Elia, holding young Prince Aegon, with Rhaenys at her side. The presence of the children was deliberate. Who would strike down a mother and babes under a peace banner? Robert's hard gaze swept over the princess and her children, and though his face betrayed little sympathy, it also lacked the savage hatred that might have been there had it been Rhaegar. Tywin's green eyes narrowed slightly at the sight of Elia, calculating. Eddard Stark showed sadness or compassion in his gray eyes. He had lost family, but he had no quarrel with children. "You have the king," Robert said flatly, nodding toward the Red Keep. "Where is he?" "Alive," Oberyn replied. "We have prevented him from burning the city, which he would surely have done had we not intervened. Now you come, presumably to claim the throne. Or perhaps Tywin does. Let us speak plainly." Robert cast a sidelong glance at Tywin, then cleared his throat. "I will claim the throne," he said. "The Targaryens are done. Rhaegar is dead, and the Mad King must answer for his crimes." He pointed his warhammer at Aegon, though not menacingly. "As for his children, I have been told by some that they must die to put an end to Targaryen claims. But I am not one for slaughtering babes." A ripple of tension went through the Dornish ranks. Tywin stared coldly, but Eddard Stark gave a small nod, as if in relief. Oberyn's grip on his spear tightened. Doran spoke carefully. "Then we have the basis for negotiation. We do not demand that Aerys remain king, only that Elia and her children be spared. Allow us to return them to Dorne, free and unharmed, and we shall yield the city to you without further bloodshed. We will even hand you the king, to face whatever justice you deem fit." Tywin Lannister's mouth curled slightly. Why should the boy Aegon live, if in future years he might try to rally support to reclaim the throne? "Because you do not want a martyr," Eddard Stark said quietly, surprising Tywin with his interruption. "Because if you slay an infant, all the realm will know you for butchers." He turned his gaze on Robert. "And that is not the kingdom we wish to build, is it?" Robert shifted his weight, looking momentarily conflicted. "Ned speaks true, but there will be those who say leaving a Targaryen alive is asking for trouble. Even if the child is exiled across the narrow sea, he could become a rallying point. Let him live in Dorne, Doran offered, though it was a gamble. We shall take him away from the heart of the realm, so he cannot be used by Targaryen loyalists. That is the best compromise. If you refuse, you will have to slaughter a child, and the Dornish will never forget it. A pause. Robert turned to Tywin. Lord Tywin, what say you? The Lord of Casterly Rock remained impassive. I say the boy is a threat and the girl as well. But if you wish to show mercy, who am I to stand in the way of your new monarchy? He gave a thin smile. I only wonder if the Dornish will remain content with their place in the realm, or if they will stir trouble in the future. But that is your problem, your grace. If I may call you that. His voice dripped with irony. Oberyn nearly spat at Tywin's arrogance but held back. Robert nodded, turning to face Doran. Swear loyalty to me, break from House Targaryen. Allow me to punish Aerys, and you can take Elia and her children back to Sunspear. They will be under your protection. But if I hear even a whisper of Targaryen rebellion emerging from Dorne, I will bring the fury of the entire realm down upon you. Do you understand? Doran inclined his head. We do. On those terms, we will open the gates and surrender the king to you, provided Elia and her children depart the city under our guard before your men enter. We cannot risk an accident. His gaze flickered to Tywin, who said nothing. Robert lifted his hammer to rest on his shoulder. Agreed. Then, in a surprising show of sincerity, he looked to Elia, the children, and said more softly, I am sorry for what you've suffered, Princess. This war has taken too much from too many. It was far from an apology for Rhaegar's death, but perhaps it was the best he could muster. Elia's eyes glistened, but she only managed a nod. I accept your terms, she said quietly, so long as my children remain unharmed. Tywin, forced to abide by Robert's stance, said nothing further. Eddard Stark, though, stepped forward to speak, addressing Elia with genuine courtesy. My lady, you and your children will be safe, I swear. You have my word. Doran sensed that vow might truly carry weight. Now the final step was to orchestrate the handover. The Dornish would discreetly escort Elia, Rhaenys, and Aegon out of King's Landing with a strong guard, heading south. Simultaneously, they would release Aerys into the custody of Robert or Eddard. Then the gates would open, and Robert's army could enter the city unopposed. For Tywin's part, he could swagger in as well, presumably hoping to secure a place in the new king's good graces. But the sack would be averted, thousands of lives spared, and House Martell would keep Elia safe. By noon that day it was done. The Dornish army lined the streets, forming a corridor from the Red Keep to the Gate of the Gods. Elia, her children, Doran, and a large escort of Dornish knights rode out, the crowds parting. Many small folk watched in awe, uncertain whether they were being freed or betrayed, but there was no violence. At the same time, a bound and raving King Aerys was dragged in chains from the Red Keep, handed over to Eddard Stark and a company of Stormlanders outside the city walls. The gold cloaks, seeing that their old monarch was finished, swiftly bent the knee to Robert. When Elia's party reached the gate, they saw Robert and Tywin waiting. Robert gave a sharp nod, signifying that the city was now under his rule. Then, true to the arrangement, he stepped aside, letting the Dornish column pass unmolested. Tywin's cold gaze lingered on Elia and the children with undisguised distaste, but he did not move to stop them. The sun glinted off his gilded armor, reflecting a man who would have slaughtered them in a heartbeat if it served his ends. But now, in this precarious new balance of power, Robert's word kept the lions at bay. Elia and the children departed King's Landing, heading south toward the open roads. Oberyn rode at her side, watchful as ever, while Doran followed with the main body of Dornish spears. Their banners still fluttered proudly in the wind, the red sun pierced by a spear. They had come to the capital to save Elia, and in a sense, they had succeeded beyond their wildest hopes. They had averted the sacking of the city by preempting Tywin's treachery, neutralized the wildfire threat by capturing the Mad King, and safeguarded Elia and her children from the horrors that might have befallen them. The cost in blood was high. Many Dornishmen had died in the storming of the Red Keep, and many small folk had suffered. Yet as they crossed the final threshold of King's Landing's gates and rode out onto the open road, the relief was palpable. The Targaryen dynasty was broken, but House Martell still stood tall, unbowed, unbent, unbroken. In the weeks that followed, Robert Baratheon took the Iron Throne, forging alliances and grudgingly accepting Tywin Lannister's claim to remain powerful in the new regime. King Aerys was tried before a hastily assembled court of lords loyal to Robert, found guilty of crimes against the realm, and executed. Eddard Stark looked on with grim acceptance, while Tywin Lannister called for a public spectacle. Robert, torn between vengeance and practicality, had the king beheaded without too much ceremony. But the message was clear. The Targaryen line was finished. Across the narrow sea, Viserys Targaryen and the infant Daenerys, born during the war in Dragonstone, vanished into exile. But Prince Aegon and Princess Rhaenys grew up in Sunspear, under the protection of their mother's kin. Whether they would one day make a claim for the throne remained to be seen. Doran Martell was far too cautious to try anything rash. But Oberyn never forgot the injustices inflicted upon Elia, nor the vengeance that might still be demanded. For the moment, though, Dorne was at peace. They had chosen their moment, seized King's Landing before the Lannisters could, and in so doing ensured Elia's survival. The small folk of King's Landing, in time, would spin stories of how the Dornish arrived just in time to protect them from both the Mad King's fire and the Lannisters' fury. Some named it the Short Martell Reign, though it was hardly a reign at all. Still, for a few crucial days, the sun of Dorne blazed over the Red Keep, overshadowing the dragon's madness and the lion's hunger. And in that sliver of time, Elia Martell's life and legacy were saved. Years later, bards might sing of the audacity of House Martell in that final chapter of the rebellion. They might embellish the swift coup in Maegor's Holdfast or the daring standoff on the walls against Tywin's host. But the truth was less a grand romance and more a desperate gambit. Doran and Oberyn had bet everything on a rapid strike and sheer nerve, and fortune had favored them enough to keep Elia's family intact. In the scorching halls of Sunspear, as the children ran laughing through the colonnades, Elia would sometimes stand by a window overlooking the sea, remembering the terror of those nights in King's Landing, when everything hung by a thread and only her brother's determined love kept her alive. She would feel the breeze from the narrow sea on her face, see the sunlight glinting off the water, and know that whatever else happened, she was home. Her children were safe, and House Martell remained unbowed, unbent, unbroken, having rewritten history, if only by a twist of fate and a serpent's bold strike.